Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are plunging straight into a grim, dark fable of spiritual decay and the birth of a totally new era. We're going to explore a profoundly haunting narrative drawn from the philosophical concepts in Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. We'll be zeroing in on this fascinating figure known as the Last Pope, a character who perfectly embodies the crumbling of traditional belief systems and the terrifying, yet completely liberating, void that comes right after. If you've ever wondered what actually happens when the absolute truths of a society finally expire, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get right into it. We begin in the shadows, guided by the incredibly melancholy monologue of the last pope. He's this poignant symbol of the massive spiritual vacuum left behind after the death of the old god. Just imagine wandering through a totally barren wasteland, weighed down by leaden prayers, desperately searching for a phantom the rest of the world has completely forgotten. You see, this isn't just a story about a guy losing his religion. It's a really profound look at what happens to human purpose when the foundational dogmas of an entire era completely collapse, leaving nothing but a spiritual desert. To truly unpack this mythic narrative, we're going to structure our analysis through a really specific philosophical lens called the Fichtean dialectic. And here's a quick fun fact. While people almost always misattribute this to Hegel, it was actually Fichte who popularized this brilliant three-stage framework for historical change. First, we have the thesis, which represents the established old order. Then comes the antithesis, the inevitable collapse into a spiritual desert. And finally, the synthesis, that emerging future where entirely new creative potential is born. We are going to use this exact structure today to see how rigid systems just have to collapse to forge a new path forward. All right, let's jump into part one. Thesis: clinging to dead dogma. This quote right here brilliantly captures the absolute tragedy of our protagonist. The last pope acknowledges his lifelong devotion, but he suddenly realizes this terrifying paradox. By serving to the very end, he's actually committed what he calls the ultimate sin. He has literally outlived his God. He is a man who's been rendered entirely obsolete, just wandering around this desolate landscape of wind and bone, desperately looking for the last pious man, just to prove to himself that the old world still exists. It's such a powerful, heavy realization of sudden irrelevance. To really understand how this kind of obsolescence happens, the source text breaks down the historical decline of traditional religious dogma through three distinct parables. They sequence chronologically, acting like this inescapable timeline of spiritual decay. We go from the death of ritual at the hollow altar, straight into the death of knowledge with the ossified scroll, and we bottom out at the death of hope with the thirsting pilgrim. Let's take a closer look at exactly how each of these eras unfolds. Okay, so the first stage is the parable of the hollow altar. This tells the story of a priest who mechanically performs his rites in a dusty, totally empty cathedral way after the congregation is turned to dust. The incense smoke doesn't even rise anymore. It just settles on the floor like a shroud. And when he finally looks into the tabernacle, he doesn't find the bread of life. He finds only cold ash. It's a perfect metaphor for the inability to maintain faith in an empty house. The ritual hasn't just lost its meaning. As the text says, the act of worship itself has literally become a burial rite because of this deep fixation on a vanishing past. Moving right along to part two, antithesis, the spiritual desert. This brings us to the parable of the ossified scroll, which represents the death of knowledge. Here we meet a scholar out in the desert, trying desperately to mend the crumbling foundation of his world's beliefs. He is out there literally sewing his decaying scrolls back together using the hair of saints as thread. But here's the catch. The more he tries to stitch those old dogmas together, the more the whole thing just falls apart. His ultimate fate? He becomes a living statue of parchment. He gets completely consumed by dead knowledge that has absolutely no relevance to the living, breathing world. So, the absolutely crucial point we need to take away from that scholar's fate is this. Rigid systems inevitably collapse under the weight of a changing world. You simply cannot contain a dynamic, new way of thinking within ossified dogmas that no longer speak to the living pulse of the present. That scholar became a statue because he absolutely refused to let the past die. It's a classic rule of nature. When a system cannot bend, it breaks. And that leads us right to the final stage of decay, the death of hope, illustrated beautifully in our third parable. This one introduces a pilgrim wandering the wastes, endlessly searching for the last pious man. He carries a flask of holy water, but over time, that water has turned entirely to salt. Think about that for a second. The salt flask is just an incredible metaphor. It perfectly captures his empty faith and the bitter, dehydrating reality of seeking spiritual validation in a total void. Every single time he thinks he finds someone on the horizon, it's just a mirage. It's just another reflection of his own existential exhaustion. The ultimate danger here of clinging to dead traditions is really just a matter of focus. The pilgrim is singularly, obsessively fixated on looking only for the last of the old. But by doing that, he completely guarantees that he will never see the first of the new. He completely misses the dawn because he just can't stop staring at the sunset. By fixating entirely on a vanishing past, this pilgrim fundamentally blinded himself to the emerging future. Finally, we reach part 3, Synthesis, the Unborn World. Our narrative takes a massive, dramatic turn right here. The last pope, standing in his twilight, finally recognizes the changing tide. He says, "I see him now, Zarathustra, the one who does not search for the dead, but speaks for the unborn." This is the huge pivot. We are finally transitioning away from this brooding, melancholic focus on everything that has died, and we are moving toward an expansive, powerful realization of new, creative human potential. Zarathustra is stepping in as the critical lens, the voice that rejects ossified dogma and champions what is yet to come. This contrast brilliantly illustrates the dialectic in full action. On one hand, you have the Pope's melancholy, which traps him in this endless fixation on a vanishing past. But in stark contrast, you have Zarathustra's critical lens, which actively drives the emergence of new creative beliefs. The Pope signifies the necessary end of an era, while Zarathustra signifies the vibrant beginning of a new one. This contrast definitively proves that the old foundation simply must crumble to allow a new way of thinking to replace those dead dogmas. Which brings us to a really profound reframing of this entire fable. The spiritual vacuum is no longer a wound that needs to be bandaged, but a space where a new world might finally breathe. Think about how powerful that is. This means the transition from spiritual decay isn't a tragedy at all. Actually, it is a totally necessary clearing out of the dead to make room for the unborn world. The Pope is simply the twilight that paves the way for a dawn he is too old to speak of, yet too wise to deny. The void we've been talking about, it isn't empty. It is pregnant with possibility. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to bridge this grim, dark fable directly to your own existential journey. In your own life, in this rapidly changing world of ours, are you wandering a spiritual desert, endlessly searching for the last of the old? Or are you ready to become the first of the new? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating synthesis with me. Keep looking forward.